Good day, Dragon Slayers. This is Dr. Tom Bitker for today's Dragon Slaying podcast on June 9th, 2024. I'm doing this one solo because I don't want to implicate any of my partners in some of the things I'm going to have to say because they're quite controversial. I'm entitling our talk today as The Gaslighting of America. And what I mean by that is that the media and our political parties are sending out information that is so grossly distorted that it seizes on any opportunity to divide us. And I think this is for conscious intent. I'll give some illustrations of this. Let's talk about how the term justice is used currently. If you have justice at the end of any phrase, such as environmental justice, social justice, or the equivalent, it usually means a way of explaining to people who are victims of the justice why the government will intervene and assign property or assign rights away from you to someone else. The beginning of this, of course, is the whole issue of critical race theory, supported by the 1619 Project. But the message is that America has victimized a variety of minority groups, African Americans, Native Americans in particular, and we owe them some form of reparations. And this has gotten so distorted that the looting of stores has been called reparations. Now, I cannot, and no historian will deny the extraordinary burden carried by African Americans and Native Americans as they attempt to climb up into a relevant and potentially prosperous role in our culture. But it does not help to identify people as victims because ultimately that is demeaning of them. So that's point one. Be careful of the words we use. Point two, we use words today in a way to taint a particular person. My local paper, the Reno Gazette, which is part of the Gannett paper system, publishing system, uses words such as Republican extremist. And a Republican extremist, at least according to the articles I'm reading most recently, are those individuals that would like to true the vote. I don't know how many of you know this, but many of our states do not compel voter ID in order to vote. The Democratic Party has said that voter ID is a way of suppressing the vote of minorities. It strikes me as an absurdity because these same minorities have to have ID in order to drive and in order to enter their workplace in many cases, or in order to serve in the armed services. It will not come as a surprise to you that most of the states in this country that don't compel voter ID in order to vote are also states in control of the Democratic Party. Now, ultimately, that is going to proceed toward a path of mutual distrust unless we can solve the problem. By the way, I come to this as somebody who has until recently been a lifelong Democrat, standing out in the rain even before I could vote to witness John Kennedy give speeches. I was in the Peace Corps. I was part of the civil rights movement. So I'm hardly somebody who would be considered a radical right-wing extremist. But I'm deeply devoted to our democratic republic and would like to see it survive. So I would ask you to carefully analyze what the media is telling you about various events. Now, unfortunately, we are presented with two presidential candidates that, at a minimum, are likely compromised in their capacity to convey the truth. My own bias is to look at the whole panoply of individuals that represent the candidate and that would represent an administration to determine what our loyalties ought to be. And I would say a fair assessment is to compare the years between 2016, get in the century, Tom, 2016 and 2020 to the years 2020 and 2024. And I think it might be fair to vote according to your experience in these two contrasting four-year periods. At any rate, I close today with an encouragement for all of you out there to dig deeper when you are presented with political sound bites or when you're presented by one perspective or another perspective by various media outlets. I think this is going to be key to us being able to reunify as a country, I hope. We will not be able to be successful if we continue to be divided along particular identity lines. Ultimately, our primary identity ought to be as American citizens, united in behalf of all in this country and looking at goodwill in behalf of all of this country. Be careful of statements such as statements that often end in the words justice, including environmental justice. Environmental justice, ironically, has been applied in such a way as to penalize those people that they are allegedly attempting to support. For example, when we raise the price of fossil fuel products, that ultimately is a way of taxing the least well endowed financially in our society. When we talk about total electrification, we also are really enhancing class differences because it's a rather expensive proposition to not only afford an electrified vehicle, but also to pay for fueling that vehicle, particularly when you're on the highway. Not that I don't support the idea, but we need an infrastructure to support the idea before people can totally commit to this. Finally, there are two other issues that I would like to address and the effect that politics has had on this. One is the educational system. The educational system has been gradually but continually moving toward enforced mediocrity by undermining the notion of meritocracy and achievement. Achievement might be perceived by some as a white racist notion. Similarly, the military, whose primary function is to defend this country, has been so distorted by woke politics as to render us indefensible in a time of a major conflict. We do not have the same level of recruiting that we had years ago. Our Army and Navy, armed forces, are not at the same level of preparedness that they were years ago. And not only do we suffer, but our allies suffer as a consequence. So you're hearing my biases. I hope I have not offended you out there. I'm dealing this from the perspective, or presenting this from the perspective of someone who is deeply patriotic. And that is not a racist term, but someone who would like to support the American dream for all of us. I'm wishing you well. I hope that we can connect again next week. Best to all. Thank you.